Welcome, everybody. We're going to wait a few more minutes for people to start joining the meeting, and we'll probably start around 1:05. All right, folks, I think we're going to get started. We anticipate some more people might be attending, but we want to be respectful of everyone's time, so we'll start now. Welcome. Thanks so much for coming. My name is Joe DiNapoli. I'm here with my colleagues Eileen, Doug, and John. They'll introduce themselves shortly. And our session today is called Analyzing Teacher Learning in a Community of Practice Centered on Video Cases of Mathematics Teaching. So I'm an assistant professor at Montclair State University in the math department, and I'm one of the leaders of the analysis team on this project. And really, the purpose of our session today is A, to share our analysis plan with all of you and get your feedback. That's really the main goal. But B, in order to do that, we want to authentically engage you in the way that we gather data and what that data really looks like. So this will be a participatory session, so we'll be putting you to work shortly. I'll move on and talk a little bit about our agenda. So as I alluded, we really have three main purposes of today's talk. So first, we want to give a little bit of context around the professional development cycle that we study, called the AIM-TRU learning cycle. So this is a project in which we study teacher learning in professional development sessions. And one of the things we're most excited about today is to simulate this cycle with all of you, so you can learn firsthand what happens in this PD and what our data set invariably will look like. After that, we want to detail our analytic method. And this method we're trying to use this method to tease out what teachers in these PD cycles over a long period of time might be learning. And we want to invite you to do some practice analysis with us, again, to give you sort of an authentic experience to our analysis plan and our coding scheme, et cetera, and because we value your feedback. So that'll be a big part of today's talk. And then lastly, we want to preview some of the emerging results we have, and also have time for a structured space for your feedback, for your questions, and for us to talk about our experiences in this session. A few logistical things. So it looks like all of you are very familiar with Zoom chat. So please feel free to use Zoom chat as a way to ask questions or as a way to make comments or whatnot. One of the four of us will be doing our best to monitor that chat, and that's always a good thing to use. Remember, you will have time at the end to speak and share, and you'll also have time in some breakout rooms today to be able to talk and share your opinions in small groups. But don't be shy about using the chat. Second, remember, you probably got an email this morning from Cadre, and that email should have shared with you a link to a Google Doc. This is sort of like a master's cheat sheet document that kind of contains some links that will be useful for you today. You can also see in the bottom right corner of this slide, and periodically throughout our session on some slides, you'll see a bit.ly link that you could just type right into your web browser, and the Google Doc should pop right up. Looks like Eileen just sent that link in the chat as well. So feel free to access that Google Doc whenever is convenient for you. You'll definitely need it to participate in this session with all of us. And I think that's it. I think we're ready to go. So I'm going to pass it off to Eileen, and Eileen's going to talk a little bit about the AIM-TRU learning cycle and give you some more info about what those professional development sessions really look like. Eileen, you're on mute.
Unmute, yes, that's the first. Perfect. So hi, everybody. My name is Eileen Murray, and I'm also currently a professor at Montclair State University with Joe, where, as he said, we head up the research team for the project. So AIM-TRU stands for Analyzing Instruction in Mathematics Using the Teaching for Robust Understanding framework. Our project addresses the pressing national need to generate shared practice-based knowledge about how to implement freely available, high-quality instructional resources that have been shown to produce significant gains in student learning outcomes. In particular, the particular resources that we're using in this project are formative assessment lessons that have been developed through the Mathematics Assessment Project, and you'll be engaging in one of these lessons pretty soon. Our goal is to understand teacher learning within a community of practice that occurs in the context of our AIM-TRU professional development learning cycle. We generally have communities of about 10 teachers who engage in this cycle 6 to 9 times over the course of a school year. And actually, the teachers who participate in the PD are coming voluntarily. They sign up to participate in it. And in fact, some of our teachers have decided to do multiple iterations or have become facilitators for future communities. So in order to give a more detailed overview of the model itself, I'm going to pass the mic off to one of our site leaders, John.
Thank you, Eileen. My name is John Russell, a senior education researcher at Math for America, and I help coordinate the model at the site in New York City. We'll actually be speaking later on with the site coordinator in Chicago as well. So the figure at the right here shows what one cycle, which takes place over the course of each session, so one session, what it looks like. And I'll also say right now that in the bit.ly, there's also a link to the resources that we provide. We have facilitator materials, we have a collection of video cases, so you can feel free to look at that later on. But to give some overview of this, we start by choosing a topic based off of criteria the facilitator and group find interesting. And then once a lesson and video case are chosen, facilitators actually start the work with participants by placing this lesson, this single formative assessment lesson, within a mathematical landscape. This way teachers see how this lesson builds off of the things that they've done and the things that they're going to be using in the future. After you've done this, just like with many facets of excellent professional development, we have participants place themselves in the position of students, solving the lesson task and placing solution pathways within the goals of the formative assessment lesson. Finally, we move from studying the lesson to actually studying its implementation in a classroom by using a video case that's centered on this same lesson from a library that we've been building, where participants look at a segment. And also say again that that library of video cases that are linked up with formative assessment lessons can be found through the link in the bit.ly. Once they've seen video of what this lesson has looked like in a classroom, particularly looking at an episode of Rich Mathematical Talk with Students, they analyzing it using a dimension of the Teaching for Robust Understanding framework. And so it probably makes sense to introduce the Teaching for Robust Understanding framework. So quickly introducing this framework that influences the lessons that were built, as well as our entire learning cycle. The Teaching for Robust Understanding framework, developed by Alan Schoenfeld and the Mathematics Assessment Project, was a result of hundreds of hours of video viewing in order to come up with a set of dimensions for powerful mathematics classrooms. So they came up with these 5 different dimensions. We're actually going to have the opportunity later on when we look at a video case together to use one of these dimensions, formative assessment, as a lens. So really the model can be simplified into 3 different activity structures, all of which allow teachers opportunities to voice ideas and reflect on the formative assessment lesson. In the limited amount of time we have today, we're going to simulate 2 of these activities together, solving a lesson and using a video case as a starting point to see how the lessons play out through the framework of TRU. And I'm going to show you some teacher artifacts from the first activity structure as well. So as with all of our video cases, we base it on a formative assessment lesson that Schoenfeld's team designed in order to demonstrate what powerful mathematics teaching can look like across a variety of mathematical ideas. All of the work we'll be doing today, not only in getting a sense of what this lesson looks like, but then analyzing the data that teachers produce, will be on the applying properties of exponents formative assessment lesson, which is a middle school formative assessment lesson. The one activity structure we don't have time for is looking at the big mathematical idea. So here's actually some teacher artifacts from when this was done in one of our cycles. And so the reason that we're not doing it here today is actually because as a part of it involves reading the lesson and doing a close reading. And we didn't want to give you all too much mark. So basically what happens here is teachers come in and try to think about how does this lesson place itself within this big mathematical picture? How can I place this lesson within the things that I have taught and the things that will be taught? And so for instance, for this applying properties of exponents lesson, here's one of the discussion questions that were pulled in the chart paper you can see from it. You can see that teachers are thinking about how applying properties of exponents, what does it mean to decompose it into representing repeated multiplication? What's the difference between expanded form and condensed form? And actually later on, the teachers pulled together many, many different big ideas that they can then use when they're going forward with other parts of the learning cycle. And so what we're going to do now is we're actually going to sample this lesson. We're going to do a small part of it with just a few cards. Let me even show you the cards. So what we're going to do is you can find the cards as a link in the Google Doc that was shared with you. And I also think it's going to show up in the chat window for the Zoom as well. Well, so what I'd like for you to do is to take turns in your breakout rooms to make a match. Matches are not necessarily on the left side and the right side. It could be right next to each other, top and down, but every single card does have one match. After you've made your match, explain your thinking to everyone else in the breakout room. If someone would like to ask a clarifying question, they're of course free to. Then I ask that you give the opportunity for someone else to make a match. We're going to give 5 minutes for this. The point of this is to give you a taste of the model so that you can think about the data this produces that Eileen and Joe will talk about analyzing later. So I think we're about ready now, but I'm wondering if there are any questions in the chat before we go into breakout rooms.
Looks like we're good, John. And I'll remind everyone, when you are in your breakout room, I think we have about 5 minutes for this. Remember, there is like a ask for help button. If you have some pressing questions that one of us might be able to join your breakout group and answer. But John, I don't see any questions. I think we're ready to go.
All right, Doug, how do you feel?
Yeah, so the breakout rooms are ready. For those of us facilitating or some of our colleagues that are also involved with this project, you'll each be with 4 other people in a room. So if you just take care of that room and make sure there are any questions, I think we have the rooms covered. Okay, so I'm going to open the rooms and then I'll start a timer. Okay, so I hope that experience of doing math was rich for you, even though it was necessarily brief given the amount of time we have. I've been involved with pre-service and in-service teacher learning for a long time, and I know from experience that engaging in the task is essential for teacher learning. So my name is Doug O'Rourke. I'm the 4th of our 4 presenters here today. I direct this Chicago site for this work at DePaul University. And in particular, I attend all of the PD cycles for the collection of teachers participating here. So again, John started off by saying, in this cycle of learning, which again, each of these cycles described here is one teacher meeting. So we repeat this cycle 6 to 9 times, depending on the site, usually in monthly meetings. So the first part of this cycle is to establish the big mathematical picture. Those are the posters John shared with you. Then the second thing teachers do is engage in the math, which I feel is really essential. And then the next part of the cycle is watching the video. And this we're actually going to do in full. And you just did the math for the corresponds to the video you're going to watch. So this is an episode of children engaging in the exponents task. Okay. So as Erickson says, watching video of classroom can be a lot like drinking from a fire hose. And so the reason why this project is called AIM-TRU is because we use the TRU framework, Teaching for Robust Understanding, to narrow down that discussion by choosing a true focus. As an aside, in Chicago public schools, the TRU dimensions are used as a focus for professional math teacher learning throughout the entire Chicago public school system. So it was very natural for us to join this project, which started in New York, both in New York City and Buffalo, and is now, as part of this research project, has added Chicago, because our teachers also use the TRU framework in their professional learning. So it was very natural. So in our current simulation, the formative assessment focus, the TRU dimension focus we're going to use is formative assessment. So we're now going to move on to watching the video, which is going to be shared through this Zoom link. So we've talked about this shared Google Doc, the bit.ly link that has that Google Doc has a link to a number of other things, including a YouTube version, a private YouTube link to this video. So if you're having any trouble with Zoom, that might be another way to watch the video. But in our test runs of this talk, we really do think you can watch it through Zoom. So before I start, I would ask you to jot down this question on the screen. What do students appear to understand and misunderstand about specific mathematical ideas? So this is the very prompt that teachers are going to be getting and reflecting on right after the video. So once this video concludes, I'm going to give you 1 minute to reflect. I'm sorry it's not more time, but again, we've got a lot of ground to cover. And then I'll finish this segment about explaining this cycle by talking about what happens after teachers do this individual reflection. The video is about 7 minutes long. So at this point, I would just say any questions, you can write them in the chat. Eileen or Joe, if you're monitoring this chat, if you can let us know if we're good to go. And John, if you could cue up the video, then we'll go on. Are we good?
Yep, looks like we're good. And don't be shy about asking questions while the video is playing too. We'll be monitoring it.
Okay, thanks.
Of how many of these can go with the blue cards?
Why are you asking that?
Because we found 4 of the blue cards go with 1 S card.
Say it one more time.
Like 4 of the white index cards go with 1 blue one. Because
So
it's
you-
like they're all equal to 2 to the 5th power.
Okay, so since there's 4 of them, can each of you choose one and tell me why it's equivalent to 2 to the 5th?
Well, 2 to the second power plus 2 to the third power. So that is 2 to the fifth power. The exponents.
How do we know that? Sorry?
2 to the second
So
power.
can I have just everyone listen to what your teacher is saying?
Alright, so 2 to the second power.
Show them the card.
That would equal to 4, and then 2 to the third power is equal to 8, 4 plus 8 would equal to 12.
Okay. And you're saying 2 to the 5th is equal to 12?
Yeah, because the bases are when the bases are the same, you add the exponents. So it's 2 plus 3 is 5. So that's why that. And for this one, it's because when it's like if you have like if you have a parentheses, if you have an exponent inside the parentheses and then outside.
Laura, can you hear what they're saying over here? Can you speak just a little bit louder so that Myra can hear you?
It's like when you have a base and like when you have a 2 to the x power, when you have like an equation like this where one exponent is inside the parentheses and one is outside, in the video it said that you're supposed to add, like, you're supposed to multiply. Wait.
Okay, but we're looking at this. So this is the one we're looking at. So this is kind of what we're. Oh, but you're saying that might be something else?
Huh?
So your teaser, you're saying, can you tell the group what you just did?
2 to the fifth power, and now we equal 30.
Make sure Myra can see it. So, So do we think that this expression? Okay, that's okay.
Using the I know. We can do 3 to the second power. That's 9, right? Minus plus, and then we can do 3 to the first power. So that's 3, right? 9 plus 3, that's 12.
Last 4 minutes.
But then you have to, don't you add
Last 4 minutes.
I mean, are there any other like equations? No, don't you like add these? But then that's 3 to the third power, that's 20.
If it's 2 to the power of negative 2, this is not equal to negative 4.
No, because you're dividing.
No, you said, no, just,
No. That's 1 over 4. Because when the exponent is negative, that's one. You put a 1. When the exponent is negative, you turn it into a fraction, where it's 1 over and then 2 to the 2, and like your base times the exponent. Base to the exponent.
y equals to
Like for example, say it was 2 to the negative third power, then do 1 over 2 to the third power or whatever it goes to.
So what's 2 to the fifth? Isn't that?
Since we're dividing, we subtract, right? Yeah, so if we're subtracting, then we get. But that's subtraction. But then this is a negative, so that's why you put this parentheses. Yeah, and then because it's dividing, and you have to subtract it anyway. But since it's already negative plus negative equals positive.
Two and a half minutes to get your thinking on chart paper, please.
So
these are the ones that we're sure about?
you're still looking for it.
Okay, that's fine.
So we're sure about this one. So the thing is that I found out an equation that was like 3 to the second power times 3 to the second power plus 3 to the first power. But then since these are the same, don't I have to like add the exponents?
Can you write that down? Because you didn't say either of these. Can you write down like that?
No, same for this.
Can you write down?
First thing about this because like 9 plus 3 is 12. But then like since the bases are the same, you don't have to like add the exponent.
Let's put that question to the group. So it sounds like that was a similar card that we had before. So something like this. So here we have bases that are the same, and what operation are we talking about?
Addition.
So we have the same thing here. So you're saying this might be equivalent to 3 to what?
3 to the third power.
Can you write that down?
Yeah.
So let's evaluate. What is 3 to the second power?
9.
And what is 3 to the second power? Is 9 plus 3 equal to 27? You just proved your conjecture.
So you only add using multiplication?
Does it work all the time with multiplication? If I had, so let's change that addition to multiplication.
Oh wait, but isn't that the same thing as 3 to the third power? Because 3 that becomes 9 to the
times 3, and then there's
another
multiplication.
Oh, so you only add this multiplication.
So it works for this example. Maybe why don't you try another example? So why don't we go use this one? So change this plus to a multiplication and see if it's going to work, and then test it out. It's a great idea to test out.
Alright, so 2 times 2 times, because of this multiplication.
Okay.
Yeah, this works.
Wait, do you guys have another question?
That's how it works because of this multiplication sign.
Yeah, it works.
Do you guys have another
How are you doing, AIM-TRU?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
That's a lot.
that works.
Okay, so I hope you found the video engaging. There's certainly a lot to analyze here. As I mentioned, the fire hose, and that's something, addressing that fire hose in our analysis is something our research team will address in the next part of the talk. But let me say a few more things about the professional development cycle before we move on. So first of all, in watching this video, I just want to emphasize that our team in the design of this research, there's a strong belief in the power of watching authentic video, which is at the heart of this work. Also, I'd remind you that earlier, John mentioned a video library that has been created in conjunction with this work. And so again, there's a link in that Google Doc. And so later on, if you enjoyed this video, there are many others related to other formative assessment lessons that you may want to view. So I'm sorry we don't have more time, but I do want to give you that 1 minute to reflect about this video and think about the prompt. What do students appear to understand and misunderstand? So I'm going to just pause here for 1 minute and let you think, and then I'll continue. Okay, so I'm going to move on. I'm sorry, I know that wasn't much time, but we do just want to give you a flavor of this PD before we move on to the analysis. So in our protocol, the 1 minute you just got, the teachers would get 2 or 3 minutes where they would reflect on the video. And while they would reflect and write on the corner of one of these discussion diamonds. So imagine I have 10 teachers and they're each surrounding one piece of chart, or in groups of 3 or 4, they're surrounding pieces of chart paper like this. Each person in that group is writing in the corners. That's the individual reflection. Then they meet as a group of 4 and they synthesize their thinking about the video, and that's what goes in the center of the diamond. I'd emphasize here, just in terms of the design of discussion diamonds, is the idea is I get individual think time, and it also really emphasizes equity of voice because everyone's ideas are explicitly on the paper and are meant to be included in the synthesis. So subsequent to this group discussion, the full group of teachers, all 10, come together, and usually there are 3 groups, and each of them shares a piece of chart paper like this. The last part of the PD for one cycle is So after attending closely to the video, the PLT closes with a whole group discussion of these 2 final questions in bold. So we come together as a full group and we discuss, imagine we could go back in time to start this part of the lesson and put ourselves in the teacher's shoes. What questions might we ask or moves might we make that invite students to make sense of and explain things? And then finally, how would these questions or moves, just imagine, help illuminate the big mathematical picture? So again, earlier in the PD, we spent a lot of time talking about and refining what the big mathematical picture is in our group sense. And then here we come back and we connect the video to that big mathematical picture and think about how the moves we're proposing can help illuminate that big mathematical picture. So from here, I'm going to turn it over to the research team and say, after groups like mine have generated all this data, what's the analytic method? So Joe, take it from here.
Thanks, Doug. Yeah, so as Doug said, you all just kind of got a taste of what it's like to be a teacher in the AIM-TRU learning cycle. And I'll talk a little bit about how we're going to try to make sense of what teachers like you might be learning as they participate in the AIM-TRU learning cycle over a period of time. So the first thing I think I should share is our research question for this project, or at least one of them. I think understanding the questions we're trying to answer will probably help situate the analysis plan that we're going to share with all of you. So our overarching research question is, what is the impact of a community of practice centered on the collective investigation of video cases grounded in high-quality instructional materials? So there's really 2 sub-questions, I think, that we can really key in on trying to answer in our analysis. One is, how do various types of discussions and activities used in our PD, used in our professional development, how do they support teacher learning? So we want to try to be able to tease out evidence that teachers are learning as a result of engaging in our professional development cycle. And then just as important, the second sub-question, what do teachers learn about high-quality mathematics instruction and instructional materials? So it's really like this 1-2 punch of, can we capture that teachers are even learning in this professional development setting over time? And then what is it that they're learning? So those are the 2 things that we're trying to answer as a result of our analysis. So now I'll move on to our theoretical framework. So to really understand our research at its core, we have to draw on the theory of communities of practice and how they learn. So Wenger defines a community of practice as a group of people who interact regularly. And so you can think of that group of people as these teachers in our professional development cycle. So a group of people who interact regularly and whose members are mutually engaged in an activity. So that activity in our context is this analysis, collective analysis of these video case studies of real life mathematics teaching, much like you all just watched. So they're mutually engaged in an activity like that. They're connected by a joint enterprise. In our context, this joint enterprise is fostering this sustained teacher learning over time about high quality instruction and about issues that arise for implementing these formative assessment lessons. And then also a community of practice is defined by people who have a shared repertoire of communal resources. So in the context of this project and in the context of the AIM-TRU learning cycle, that repertoire is the TRU framework and the materials that come with it. Everything about this PD cycle has roots in the TRU framework and in those dimensions of what we know to be powerful mathematics classrooms. So it's really across all of these 3 things that we see the teachers in our AIM-TRU learning cycle as a real community of practice. So then, of course, the question begs, what does learning look like in a community of practice, and how can we recognize it? So again, drawing on Wenger, Wenger claims that people learn through their collective participation in these specific communities of practice. And the evidence of that learning is twofold: changes in participation and then resulting reification. So this negotiation of meaning is represented by changes in the way that these teachers are participating across this professional development. And that participation gets reified in certain ways to give form to the meaning through the different dimensions of the community of practice. So again, to try to hyper focus on the context of the AIM-TRU learning cycle, in our context, these reified changes of participation can manifest themselves as participants engage with evolving forms of mutual engagement around the video case studies of mathematics teaching, meaning we can start to detect how the way they're engaging with these videos is changing over time, and the reified things that come out of that as a result. Also, as participants engage with understanding and tuning their enterprise about teacher learning around high quality instruction, so we can start to see how their participation changes. They're starting to better understand questions around the implementation of these high quality instructional materials. And then lastly, as participants engage with developing their repertoire and styles and discourse around the TRU framework. So we'll be able to detect the ways that they participate about TRU and learning about the TRU dimensions and talking about the TRU dimensions, perhaps planning intentional ways to apply the TRU dimensions more to their classroom practice. Really anything like that, we can recognize those changes in participation and what gets reified as a result of that. So then lastly, as I said before in our research questions, it's not just enough for us to be able to document that teachers are in fact learning as a result of engagement in our professional development cycle, but then what they're learning is just as important. So we really want to be able to classify and evaluate the things that teachers are learning as they engage together in their community of practice over time in our AIM-TRU learning cycle. So in our context, this won't be a surprise. We want to know the extent to which teachers are learning about TRU, that teachers are learning about the Teaching for Robust Understanding framework and how to implement formative assessment lessons in a way that really aligns to those dimensions, those 5 dimensions of the TRU framework. So again, we're trying to answer that 1-2 punch of these teachers in this community of practice meeting together. It's the same teachers over a course of time. Are they learning by watching these videos, by engaging with the mathematics, by answering targeted questions together? Are they learning? And if they are, what are they learning relative to the TRU framework? So that's kind of an overview of really what we're interested in trying to tease out in our analytic method. And I'm going to pass it over to Eileen next, and she's going to share some of the details of frame analysis, which is an intentional tool that we use to try to recognize this learning in our AIM-TRU learning cycle.
All right, my mic's off. I remembered this time. All right, so we're going to be using frame analysis, and we're going to describe this right now. And we're using frame analysis to help us capture the learning in the community of practice, as Joe just said. So frames are co-constructed objects among the community that represent in-the-moment meaning making. By using these frames, we can capture the ways the teachers do certain things. For example, how they represent what they see as problematic, what potential solutions they might come up with, and then justifications for their solutions. And each of these actions are labeled using specific frame types that I'll define in a minute. So we're using the frames to help us classify and organize teacher conversations within the PD model and then evaluate their learning over the extent of the PD. In order to use frame analysis, the first thing we need to do is chunk the conversations using what we are calling episodes of pedagogical reasoning, or EPRs. We came to this idea of using EPRs to identify our units of analysis by way of Dr. Alana Horn. In 2007, she defined EPRs as units of teacher-to-teacher talk in which teachers exhibit their understanding of an issue in their practice. So then we leveraged this definition and defined our own parameters for our particular context for identifying these EPRs. And we're defining them as units of talk in which multiple participants respond to one of the facilitation prompts post-video watching. Now, in addition, because this idea of EPR and framing is rooted in these issues or problems of practice, we actually defined an overarching problem of practice. And this is, how do we implement FALs in a way aligned with TRU? So we decided on this overarching problem of practice because it's really the foundation of the model itself. And all of the issues that were being discussed could actually be traced back to this one overarching problem of practice. Okay, so after identifying these units of analysis, we then are able to frame. So in there, we have 3 frames, right? So we have a diagnostic frame, which is when teachers attribute causality for an aspect of implementing an FAL. The second type of frame is a prognostic frame, and this is when teachers discuss a solution or possible solutions for a diagnosis. And these could be implicit from earlier conversations, and I'll explain that in a minute. And finally, the third type of frame is a motivational frame. And this is when teachers provide a rationale for engaging in a particular action for why a prognosis is made. So now let me give you a little bit more details on each type. When we think about a diagnostic frame, we're coding for particular aspects of implementing the FAL. And again, these are aligned with particular facilitation questions being asked. So when some of these aspects that we found so far are things like group dynamics, providing students the opportunities to learn in different ways, and aligning teacher moves to the bigger mathematical idea. So think back to what Doug was talking about and what he was doing earlier when he was talking about that discussion diamond and the subsequent conversations. Those questions explicitly correspond to these different aspects. In identifying the attribution of causality, what that means is we're looking for an explicit or implicit because statement. Now, we're not looking for the teachers to say because necessarily, right? We're just really looking for them to discuss some evidence that goes beyond just saying this is an aspect without any further interrogation. Okay, so prognostic framing is when we are looking and coding for possible solutions or proposed solutions. And actually just an analysis strategy that we've been using, sometimes it's easier to find these, and then we go back and find the diagnosis that they're proposing the solution for. And the implicit part of this is, you know, our teachers are in communities. And so some conversations span several sessions. And so the teachers won't actually repeat the diagnosis explicitly. Instead, they use key phrases or words to refer to those previous conversations. And in fact, this act is of replacing these conversations with keywords or phrases is an example of what Joe was talking about in terms of reification. I know that I personally use this idea in my classroom teaching. So when I'm teaching pre-calculus, I use like a Ferris wheel example when we talk about trigonometric functions. And then I can just say Ferris wheel at some point later in the semester, and my students will remember, like, that's what this means. Like, this is what we're talking about. And we include these prognoses and use them and pair them with previously defined diagnoses in the coding scheme. All right, finally, we have the motivational framings, which includes the rationale. So sometimes teachers will just say, I think this is a solution. And so when we want to code for a motivational frame, we're looking for more than just that mention of, I think this is going to work. We're looking for a rationale that includes some sort of justification for the stated prognosis that includes evidence from their practice or possibly from something that they've read or some research that they've seen. All right, now this is a lot, right? There's a lot to take in, so let me try to summarize. We transcribe the post-video discussion, and we identify the activities, the specific activities in the PD model to at first identify our EPRs, and those correspond to those 3 post-video watching questions that are listed on this slide. Okay, and then we write a description for the EPR because we're trying to create memos, so we have a history of what's been happening in the PD. This helps us identify aspects of implementing the FALs that the teachers discuss, and also helps us identify those implicit diagnoses later that could occur. Right, then when we use the frame analysis to frame each EPR, right, we're identifying a diagnosis, and then a possible prognosis. They can diagnose, but not necessarily prognose. And then if we find a prognosis, we then look for a motivation, which may or may not occur. And the other thing I want to mention is that it's expected that we're going to find several frames within each EPR. And the last thing I want to say is that at this stage, we're always careful to find evidence from the transcript to support our coding so that we can center the teacher voices. Okay, so you're all experts at this point, right? So now you can actually do it. So we're gonna actually have you do it, right? So this is what's gonna happen. We're gonna put you into breakout rooms, the same ones you were in before, and we're gonna provide you with a transcript of a specific EPR. Now, this is in the link document, and we're going to be looking at what's labeled EPR1. And I'm going to give you a minute to open up that link, and you should see something that looks like this. Next slide. All right, so once you find that, okay, we're gonna break out and we're gonna have you read the transcript in your groups, and the goal is to try to identify possible frames with your group. And so you're going to record your thoughts in a table so that we can keep track of what people are seeing. And at the bottom of the document that you just opened, you'll find a table. And it's within this table that we would like for you to record your thoughts. And please choose the row number that matches your breakout room number. Right. So remember, as you identify these frames, you might not find all types. That's totally fine. You may just decide to focus on one small part of the transcript that your group finds interesting and talk about that transaction. I mean, honestly, just whatever you want to do at this point to practice your newfound expertise in our analytic method. And what's going to happen is we're going to give you about 10 to 15 minutes to do this. If you are like extra expert at this, we actually have 2 others, so you don't have to just sit there. You can open up EPR2 and or EPR3 and look at those as well. So what questions do people have before we throw you out into your breakout rooms?
Eileen, Orly just asked a really good question in the chat, to which I responded, so people can check it out. But the gist of it, it was a good question of, do you only attribute frames to particular teachers or to an entire episode or what? So I think what we're looking for here of evidence of, say, a diagnosis, a diagnostic frame, a bunch of teachers are going to be talking about something they saw in the video that, perhaps could be problematic to really, teach that formative assessment lesson the best they could. So maybe a bunch of teachers are talking about something, and it's a quote amidst that teacher talk that states evidence of, like, this is what we're diagnosing that could be a problem, a potential problem. Or prognosis might be easier to talk about. So maybe a group of 3 teachers are kicking around an idea of, like, well, maybe we could do this. So we could, in that transcript, you, Orly, and everyone else, you could almost highlight a quote or 2 and say, this quote was informed by all the teachers that were in the community of practice, but that quote kind of encapsulates what they're prognosing. Like, what are we going to do to address this diagnosis that we noticed? It was a good question.
Any other questions before we break out?
Oh, here's another one. Crystal has a really good question. How do you address instances where multiple teachers are presenting opposing information? That's an awesome question, Crystal. And I think the simple answer is there can be more than one frame in a particular episode. So there might be groups of teachers. We see this all the time in analysis meetings where, there are like 8 or 10 teachers in these professional development sessions. So there might be some teachers that are talking about one thing, like, hey, I noticed this that could be problematic in the way students are understanding something. So I prognose that we do that. That could be one collection of a diagnostic and a prognostic frame. But then there might be other teachers that disagree or are talking about something different, but all existing in the same episode. So Crystal's question is well received in that, there could be multiple frames. You could have a diagnosis and a prognosis that are talking about one particular thing that are important to teachers, and you could have something completely different that's existing in the same exact episode. So you could have and if you find that in this transcript that we're about to share, this transcript of teachers talking, about the video you all just watched, feel free to organize it as such. Like, I see this diagnosis about this, and maybe a prognosis and a motivation to go with it. But then separately, I see that diagnosis about that and a separate prognosis and or motivation to go with that. So that is definitely a possibility.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that, Joe. You're actually, the transcript you're reading is a conversation about the exact video you just watched. So they just saw the same thing and now they're talking about it.
Pepe asks a question, is everyone named in the right-hand column of the transcript, a teacher, or is someone a facilitator? They're all teachers, but there is a teacher/facilitator in there, but they're all practicing teachers that have volunteered to be in this professional development session.
Right, and I would just say that the identified facilitating teachers are full participants, right? So they're, when it comes to participating in discussions, they are acting as any other teacher.
All right, so let's go ahead and move into our breakout rooms. We will give you a 2-minute warning through a broadcast into the breakout rooms. But yeah,
we are back.
Cool. Okay, so thank you, everyone. I appreciate your hard work for this. And I know we only have until 2:30, so we want to get a chance for people to share a little bit about what they found, relative to evidence of diagnoses, evidence of prognoses, and evidence of motivations. I think where I'll start, so I'm interested to see if people wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about the evidence they found. And I know one group in the top row there, Orly's group, they had an interesting conversation. It was Orly and Jennifer, I think, were the ones that populated some of this evidence. So I think, Orly, would you mind sharing your perspective a bit about the evidence of the diagnosis you saw and even the prognosis you saw? And then maybe Jennifer could talk a little bit about the motivation piece. And I'll be interested to see if other groups agreed or disagreed or where this conversation goes. So Orly, if you don't mind, I'll leave it to you.
Well, thank you. I kind of feel a little bit flustered because I got the group named after me, which I don't think I deserve at all. I think what Eileen said before this, that it's sometimes kind of finding the prognosis and then looking what's the diagnosis is a way to go. I think kind of that was an experience reading this. So the prognosis is this teacher saying an interesting task they could do. For what cases a to the x plus a to the y is actually equal to a to the x plus y. So this teacher is suggesting a task that students can do, and the diagnosis that the teacher is saying that that the video provided evidence of misunderstanding that a to the x plus a to the y is a to the x plus y, and therefore they kind of suggest maybe students should engage in this task.
Yeah, it was a really interesting observation by Orly. Like, she's picking up on the way teachers are talking about this, and we can, if we start at that diagnosis, I think you remember those students in the video, right? I think they were engaging with the 3 to the second power plus 3 to the first power card. And they're trying to reconcile, can we just add these exponents or not? And you can see up in line 24 or 124, excuse me, in the transcript, Orly has it highlighted in green in her evidence of prognosis cell. But teachers are saying, maybe they could do an investigation kind of activity to discover the cases when that's actually true, and maybe just as important, the cases when it's not. So I thought that was a really interesting piece of frame analysis from this group. And Jennifer, if you don't mind, Jennifer had a really unique viewpoint on evidence of a motivational frame that went with this, those particular diagnoses and prognoses that Orly just described. Jennifer, do you mind explaining what you wrote in the motivation cell?
Sure. So we put this quote from the transcript there around, some kids would think it would be a lot of fun to do that investigation. At first, I was thinking that the motivation was student related, but then, talking through it, the motivation is actually the teacher rationale, but one teacher rationale or reason for doing it is because students might be motivated by an interesting problem and more engaged with something like that.
Yeah, it was a really interesting perspective that Jennifer took, and I'll admit it was one that was different from my own. And I think Jennifer really keys in on this evidence of a motivational frame in, students really being engaged with the activity, like being excited and motivated to actually go through an investigations activity or exploration activity, rather than maybe a more traditional, let's just listen to the teacher tell me how to do this thing. So Jennifer's point was well taken, that, this kind of activity that those teachers were prognosing might actually do a nice job in exciting those students to actually want to explore those mathematical ideas, which I thought was pretty cool. Thank you so much for sharing, Orly and Jennifer. I definitely appreciate that. As I know we're running out of time, I wish we could talk about more observations, because it seems like there was a couple differences of opinion, especially in the motivational frame. I saw some other evidence, and John, you don't need to go back to the Google Doc, you don't have to, but there was some other evidence that were more mathematical in terms of motivations, that perhaps conducting sort of an investigation activity, it could reinforce this big mathematical picture idea of equivalence, that, certain cards are equivalent to each other, and it's not magic that one card goes with another and that these laws exist, but that there's more to it than that. So I thought the different motivational frames that we just saw, the one that Jennifer shared and the one that I saw in a couple other columns, it's pretty interesting to see that. And it illustrates Eileen's point very well, that there can be a lot of different frames, many different frames in the same episode of pedagogical reasoning. And it's something that we're trying to reconcile ourselves, because there's so many interesting things to pay attention to as analysts, that we have to try to be as organized as can to recognize what these frames look like and how they might be showing evidence of teacher learning over time. So I guess that's my cue. I should move on to our emerging results, and then give all of you a chance to ask some questions of your experience here today. So in sharing about what we plan to do next as a project team on the analysis side of things, so all of you just got a taste of frame analysis, right? That we're looking for evidence of diagnoses, prognoses, and motivations. So we're doing that too. And we're doing that across several different sessions and several different episodes of pedagogical reasoning. We're in year one of a 4-year project, right? So you just saw one episode from one session. So we're going episode by episode across all sessions from now until, I guess 3 years from now, for a 4-year project total. And we're trying to analyze those diagnoses, prognoses, and motivations over time. And we're trying to describe the patterns we see, the patterns in the way that teachers in their community of practice are participating in our professional development, and using frame analysis to be able to recognize those patterns. And we want to be able to see what is being reified as a result of those kinds of changes in participation. So, it was recognizing that if learning is happening was one piece of the puzzle, but then of course, being able to align that with the true dimensions as well. So what are they learning? Are they learning about true dimensions in a way that is useful for implementing FALs? And we actually developed a very specific rubric for this context that is able to code for levels of different alignment, where we can look at turns in teacher talk and be able to classify and level, the ways they were addressing particular true dimensions. So, on the next slide, we see just an example of how we're organizing a little bit of this data. This is kind of a rough draft, if you will, but you can kind of see across the columns, we've looked so far over 4 sessions. And so far we've considered only the diagnostic and prognostic frames, and starting to see that as we look across these sessions, and again, we're going to continue to do this for the whole 4 years of the project. This is just a tiny snapshot, but we're starting to see that teachers in this PD are consistently focusing on building students' conceptual understanding behind strategies and representations that they engage with. Like, that seems to be a reoccurring issue that we're finding, an issue that teachers are deeming important as they consider how to implement these formative assessment lessons. And so the teachers talking about this in a lot of different ways. a lot of the prognoses were around adapting the lesson, we've noticed. And these adaptations varied in their alignment to the TRU framework. So you can kind of see, and again, we could spend hours unpacking what we found, so I won't belabor this, but you can kind of see in the first session, participants were sharing ideas, but we didn't see much evidence of them critiquing each other or building on each other's thinking. But over time, we noticed that participation started to change. And participants appeared to be more comfortable challenging each other and building on each other's thinking. So that would be evidence of how changes in participation could manifest over the course of, in this case, 4 sessions. There's lots of things we could unpack in this table, but I just wanted to give you a sense of kind of where we are headed. And I'm so honored that you all joined our session today to be able to join in a little bit of what a piece of that analysis process looks like. And as you can see, it's going to inform ways we're trying to classify and talk about what teachers are learning over time as they continually meet in these professional development sessions. Okay, so we're near the end, and we want to give you all a chance to ask questions, either orally in Zoom or in the chat. I see there might be some questions. There's some questions in the chat already. So keep doing that. The presenters can definitely talk about these things. We're interested in really any feedback you have for us, but namely, maybe you see some improvements. If you've done work like this, we're definitely listening. If you have some suggestions for how we can improve our analysis plan and the way that we unpacked it today. Maybe there's parts of our plan that need further clarification. That we are open ears to that. We know that this can be kind of a dense plan to share, and I thought Eileen did a great job, but there's probably a million other things we could say. So any insight you could give us there would be great. And then really any other questions you may have would be fantastic. So are there questions in the chat? Was I right?
Yeah, so the first question was, do you have plans to connect this to student outcomes at any point?
Student outcomes?
Not yet. That's the next grant.
Not yet.
Looking at teacher learning, and then we can go. However, one of the reasons we chose this particular source was because there has been research conducted that shows the learning gains for students in engaging in these formative assessment lessons. And I can share that work with you, but no, we're not doing that yet. That would be the next grant that we get from NSF, if they're listening.
Yeah, please give us another chance to answer that question. Amy asks another really good question. Do teachers also focus on evidence of students' strengths and understandings, or is that not coded as diagnostic? No, Amy, that is coded as diagnostic because there might be some evidence in different episodes that we shared today of teachers keying in on, wow, students really seem to understand this well, and maybe we could prognose a way to optimize it even further, or prognose it in a way maybe not that exact classroom that we saw in the video, but maybe in my own classroom, I could introduce this activity or frame this activity in a way that could optimize those strengths, and make them even better or more prevalent or what have you. So I think Amy's point is well taken that, sometimes it might be easier to recognize diagnoses that, that imply like room for improvement, like things that students might not quite understand yet. But that's not always the case. That focusing in on strengths is certainly also evidence of a diagnosis that we would find interesting and code as such. Eileen, do you have anything to add about that? That was an interesting question.
Yeah, no, I think we also talked about that in our group, and I said basically the same thing. In terms of coding for participation, that is really the nature of frame analysis. And so we look for what the teachers are saying, how they're saying it, as Joe just mentioned, when do they start to actually critique and build on each other's thinking. And so that actually is coming through the descriptions of the frames. And so that's how we code for that participation.
Crystal asks, in your analyses, how do you account for frames where teachers maybe demonstrated an inaccurate understanding of the content being taught in PD? Crystal, that's a good question. I would say one way we're accounting for that is when we align it to the TRU framework, which we didn't get a chance to really talk explicitly about today, but for example, if I build off something Orly shared with all of you in her prognosis of like, you know, in looking over that transcript, like one thing we could do is design an exploratory activity so these kids could really discover that, you know, some of these laws work under certain conditions, but not under others. So one thing we would do with that prognostic frame is we would align it to this true framework rubric we've developed, in which we basically rate it as, is that productive? Does that align with the real tenets of true? And, you know, in some cases, some suggestions, and I think this is your point, Crystal, some suggestions, some prognoses, for example, might not align to what we would all deem as, you know, a good prognosis, or a prognosis that's deeply rooted in you know, teaching for robust understanding. So we do have a way of capturing that in that last piece of the analysis puzzle, meaning, you know, saying that, you know what, yes, that was a prognosis, but that doesn't really align to a particular true dimension in the way that we would hope. So we might code that as, you know, maybe a cognitive demand dimension level 1, like low level, where maybe it is a little problematic what they're prognosing. But then, of course, what we would hope to see, Crystal, would be over time, literally the same teachers starting to prognose things that are higher up on our true rubric. So they start to suggest things that would be more cognitively demanding and would be more, you know, productive for conceptual understanding, so to speak. So yeah, we are accounting for that in our analysis, and I think it would live in that true dimension alignment step that we didn't really talk about too much today, but hopefully I gave enough info so you can see that it's something that we are thinking about.
And I'm going to skip down to Catherine's question before I tackle that implicit diagnostic. Catherine, it was actually the EPR, deciding what the EPRs were going to be, did take several practice iterations of the analysis plan using our pilot data. And so what we did in order for us to make sure that we were consistent is that that's when we decided that we would have 3 EPRs for each session based on the conversation after each question. Because an EPR is, you know, when they're talking about something that happened, you know, when it's teacher-teacher talk where they're addressing implementing an FAL. And so the natures of the question actually set us up nicely. And this is going to make us, like, part of using EPRs is to streamline it. We're about to get dumped with a bunch of data. And so we needed to say, like, how can we find these quickly and reliably, like you said? And so that's why we decided, like, the talk after this question is 1 EPR, the talk after this question is another, and then we have the third.
Yeah, well said. I see Jonathan's question there too, which piqued my interest. Will we try to capture impact on teachers' practice? Jonathan, that's a very insightful question, because that is our second research question that we didn't share today in this talk. I think this talk would have had to be 6 hours if we did. But our second overarching question is exactly that. We're gonna, you know, these teachers that are in this community of practice attending these PD sessions over time, many of them are inviting us into their classrooms where they are enacting these lessons. And we're gonna be able to conduct some classroom observations in which we try to capture that impact. So we'll be able to, you know, we're so gracious that they're inviting us in, and we'll be able to see, are the things that they're learning in our AIM-TRU professional development cycle, is that actually getting into their classrooms? Because these are all practicing teachers with the intent of taking what they're learning and putting it into action, and we'll actually be able to have data points that speak to that very thing directly. So that's a really exciting part of our project. I think, and Eileen, I think you'll agree, where we're sitting now is trying to sort out our analysis plan of what's happening in the PD sessions, to making sense of those. So all of this first year, as the data has been rolling in, we're trying to sharpen our analytic skills so that we can make sense of the data that's happening in these PD sessions, much like you all just did by looking at those transcripts. And then eventually, Jonathan and others, eventually we're going to start following that, continue to do that work of making sense of what's happening in the PD, but then following teachers into their classrooms and be able to measure impact in a way that's, you know, very, very practical.
So we have about a minute. I'm just going to try to quickly attend to the implicit diagnostic mentioned. yes, this teachers sometimes don't necessarily base in concrete evidence, but as John wrote in the chat, we have a facilitator protocol. And so we are really working to make sure that we have discourse practices in place to help teachers be more explicit. So yes, we are trying to do that. And we're not saying like that's wrong, because the teachers in community will come to different conclusions over time. But I think that's about it we have time for.
I'm so happy that we had questions. This was a lot of fun. I know it was rushed, and I know it's never easy to take a crash course on someone else's research and how they're analyzing it and actually do some of it. So I think I speak for all my colleagues that we are very grateful for your attendance today and your participation. And John, you read my mind about putting up our contact info. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us. You have that cheat sheet Google Doc that has some links that you could feel free to explore at your own pace, and all of us would be excited to engage with you around any follow-up questions you might have. So please do not hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I wanted to thank, we had some other colleagues here that are part of the project. Michael Driscoll from Math for America has been in and out. David Jabin and Jolene Arlent Lee are here. So thank you for joining us as well.
Thanks, everybody.